By the end of this episode, you will learn about psychics and murder investigations. Do real detectives ever use psychics in murder investigations? You've seen the shows. Psychic walks through a crime scene, sees what other people missed, and suddenly the case breaks wide open. Makes for great TV, doesn't it? But what actually happens when a self described psychic calls a homicide squad and says, I know where the body is? I'm going to tell you about my own experience where psychics got involved with a homicide case that I was in charge of as an NYPD detective squad commander, how detectives actually handle those calls when they come in, and why, like in cases like Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, chasing untestable information could be just as dangerous as releasing, say, a blood-stained crime scene in 24 hours and hoping that nothing else gets contaminated. First, let's talk about what's been studied and documented. Surveys of police departments in the U.S. have found that some agencies have, at one point or another, accepted information from self-described psychics, usually in high-profile or difficult cases. But across those surveys, agencies consistently report that even when psychics were involved, there was no clear evidence they did anything a good tip or a good detective couldn't do. There have also been studies that tested psychics against real case details. And when you strip away hindsight and storytelling, their hits were about what you'd expect from chance. When they're consulted at all, it's usually by a victim's family and also as a last resort. There are plenty of stories and documentaries where psychics appear to help. But when you look at actual case files, you don't see a reliable pattern of psychics solving cases in a way that holds up under scrutiny. Okay, now let's get practical. You're in a detective squad. Phone rings. Someone says, I'm a psychic and I see a body near water. There's a red truck and the killer's name starts with J. What actually happens next? Detectives will document the tip so that there's a record. They will check whether any specific details line up with information that isn't public. But they can't use that tip by itself as the basis for search warrants, arrests, or major tactical decisions. You can't walk into a judge's chambers and say, Your Honor, we need a warrant because the psychic had a vision. It doesn't work like that. Even in situations where psychics' descriptions happen to match a location where evidence is later found, investigators still have to show that their actions were justified by lawful, documented reasons. Okay, now I want to tell you about one case that still sticks with me. Now, this isn't something you'll read in a book or a newspaper. This actually happened when I was an NYPD detective squad commander. It was a homicide case. It was a strangulation involving a female victim. The crime scene was staged, and we found a verified love triangle. Now, we had a strong hunch about who did it, not a random name, someone that had a close relationship to the family, someone whose behavior and circumstances put him right at the top of our list. But we did not have probable cause to arrest him. There simply wasn't enough evidence tying him directly to the murder. And although we did interview and interrogate him at length, it never yielded enough to bring us to that level of probable cause in order to effect an arrest. Now, the victim's mother, in her grief, started seeking out psychics. Problem was that this guy who was our number one suspect was also known to the victim's mother, and she trusted him. So she went to one psychic for a reading, and she shared the information that she got with this person. So she comes back to us and she says, the psychic described the person who killed my daughter. It wasn't some vague description like a man or it's someone close to you. There were specific characteristics and details about him and the crime scene that lined up very closely to our case. It was the kind of description that makes seasoned detectives stop and look at each other like we all did, and we're like, what the hell? Now, we can't use psychic statements in official reports as the basis for steering an investigation. What do you do as the detective squad commander? You have to acknowledge that the psychic stuff was certainly unsettling. You can't pretend it didn't happen or you didn't hear it, but you also can't change the course of the investigation. So here we are. We have the victim's mother with a suspect we strongly believe is responsible, a psychic providing some detailed information that essentially hits the nail on the head. Then something else happens. The suspect finds out what the psychic has been saying to the mother. Then he tells her that obviously this psychic is mistaken because she's describing me. In her psychic head, she must have seen me with you, so that's why she's describing me as the killer. So what does he do? He steers the mother to a different psychic whom he knew. Now it was even more of a mess. Two psychics, conflicting information, and the human element of seeing this grieving mother being pulled in different directions. It was heartbreaking to see. Now, none of it ever turned into usable evidence, only distractions. Okay, let's talk about the ethical and legal risks when psychics enter a real investigation. First and foremost, false hope for families. In the worst cases, long-term missing persons or unsolved homicides, you have families that will talk to anyone who might give them answers. When a psychic tells a mother, I know who killed your daughter, that can create a powerful certainty, but with zero evidence behind it. Then, like in my case, they call the detectives and say, why aren't you doing exactly what this psychic told me? Are you ignoring this because you don't care? Of course, that's not the case. And as a commander, you have to walk a little bit of a tightrope here because you always have to respect the family's grief while still trying to protect them from exploitation and from your case turning into a wild goose chase. Second, public confusion about what solves cases. When the media latch on to the psychic angle, the public could wind up believing the case was solved because of a psychic vision, when in reality, it was solved through forensics, digital records, or a witness finally telling the truth. It's a distortion of the real investigative work. Third, documentation and courtroom issues. If a psychic tip is the real reason you went somewhere and is not supported by lawful, documented cause, a defense attorney would go to town on how you generated that lead. So smart investigators are very careful about how they document the origin of their decisions. But let's compare psychics with something grounded in factual, usable evidence. Forensic psychology and profiling. Now, I've had FBI profilers come into some of my homicide cases, and a profile looks at real data, the victim's life, the crime scene, behaviors, timing, and location patterns. They build a logical picture to narrow the field. Now, that work may be imperfect, but at least it's rooted in observable facts and tested methods. Psychic descriptions are usually more broad. So, do real detectives hear from psychics? Yes. Do some agencies occasionally sit down and listen? Yes. But when you strip away the television reenactments and the dramatic music, the pattern still remains the same. There is no reliable evidence that psychics as a group solve cases better than standard investigative work. Their tips, at best, are treated like any other tip, something to be documented, but verified. And in these high pressure cases, chasing untestable psychic claims can waste valuable time, divert important resources, confuse families, and affect your decision making. Real investigations still come down to the same fundamentals: scenes that are protected, not rushed; evidence that is collected, not contaminated; witnesses that are interviewed, not ignored; leads that are documented, not imagined; and making command decisions that could be defended in court, not just in a television documentary. Psychic calls and the information that I have had personal experience with really do make you think. And some are surprisingly accurate. So I'm not saying that all psychics don't know what they're talking about. Some of them very well may even be correct. If you want to understand how investigations actually work, not how they look in a psychic special, you're definitely in the right place. I'm Mike Blangiforti, and you've been listening to Truth, Investigations, and Criminal Behavior. Remember, it's always facts over speculation. Thanks for tuning in.